Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this brand new special edition UN Algeria's Voice for Arab and African Countries. January 2025 marks Algeria's UNSC presidency during a time of global tensions with ongoing conflicts in Gaza, Sudan, Syria, Libya, Lebanon, in the Middle East and in Africa. The Council faces mounting pressure to act decisively. Algeria, representing both Arab and African voices, has positioned itself as a key voice in these discussions.
The international community, I repeat, should not repeat the mistakes made elsewhere in the region.
I am proud that our representative in the Security Council is Algeria, working closely with us, reflecting the demands of the Arab group, and I think today we prevailed.
Beyond the Middle East, Algeria has been actively engaged in promoting African-led solutions to crises in Sudan and Libya, while continuing to advocate for the decolonization of Western Sahara and fair representation for Africa. Let's start with introducing our guests. We have with us today Mr. Laïd Zaghlami, political analyst at the Faculty of Information and Communication. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you. We also have Mr. Professor Mohammed Amin Souiad, professor in political sciences and international relations. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's begin with the latest. In its first week, Algeria convened two meetings. The Council addressed the collapse of hospitals in Gaza, and the second meeting focusing on the protection of civilians in conflict zones like in Sudan. A little reminder to our viewers, no less than 70% of the killed civilians in Gaza are women and children. Mr. Zaghlami, let's begin with Palestine. Algeria has constantly framed Palestine as a moral and just cause. Algeria's resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire received overwhelming support, but the U.S. vetoed most of the draft resolutions, the majority of them. How does Algeria's strategy challenge the geopolitical dynamics at the UNSC?
Thank you once more for having me on your program. I think it's not new for Algeria, that has been supporting the Palestinian cause since 1965, the beginning of the Palestinian Revolution. And of course, it's out of pride and honor and history to see my country presiding for at least 1 month the destiny of United Nations. And of course, they will be working very hard to resume peace and stability in the world, and particularly in the Arab world, as well as in the African continent, because they are defending the voices of the Arabs and the voice of African.
The friend of the just causes.
Yes. Talking now about Palestinian, I think our President Abdelmajid Tebboune has said once that that the Palestinian case is our national problem, and therefore we are committed to defending, to supporting Palestine by hook or by crook. Because why? Because it's a legal, it's a legitimate rights for them to recover their independence. How on earth, for 75 years, since the 75 years, and the Palestinian people are still under occupation, under misery, under, of course, I would say domination by the Israelis. They should not prevail, despite all the protests are all over the world. But Algeria, and as I heard once our representative, Mr. Benjama, he said Algeria is fully committed to continue whatever happened to defend the Palestinian, because we think it's our right, our duty as humanity after all.
And Palestine must see the establishment of the
Absolutely,
Palestinian
this is the ultimate goal of Algeria. Algeria won't be peaceful, won't be at ease if the Palestinians have not recovered their full state and the building of their state.
Now I want to talk a very vital topic. It's the UN body for Palestinians, which would be halted by the Zionist occupiers this month. We're talking about UNRWA. Algeria has donated $15 million to UNRWA and has prioritized protecting it. Before starting with the questions, let's have a listen to the Ambassador Ammar bin Jama.
Decisions adopted by the Israeli authorities aimed at halting UNRWA's activities in the occupying Palestinian territories. If implemented, these measures will utterly deny Palestinians access to the life-saving services provided by UNRWA. Let me be clear. UNRWA is irreplaceable. It operates in accordance with the mandate from the United Nations General Assembly, and it reflects the collective will of the international community. Any attempt to undermine UNRWA in an affront to the international community as a whole. We must all work together to preserve UNRWA and ensure it can continue its critical work.
As we've heard, Ambassador, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar bin Jama. Mr. Zaghlami, I have a question. What would the loss of UNRWA mean for Palestinians? They are already suffering from famine, and the little aid that enters will be halted.
I think this is completely out of right. And what I want to say, the Palestinians have the right to exist.
Yes.
And that's why there is this agency, and this agency is about to offer them the little they can do: support, shelter, help, and humanitarian, and so forth. And it is not in the right of the Israeli I would say, to refuse this body. And therefore, I know that there are a lot of claims regarding whether some interference, there are some agents working for the Palestinians within this agency. But the report made by an international independent observer didn't find any I would say, complicity whatsoever. So Israel is completely in the wrong way, and that's why United Nations Relief Agency is here to exist and to support and the Palestinians until they get their own independence.
Unfortunately, Mr. Palestinians are not living, are just alive.
Yeah, absolutely, but this is the question should be put to the minds and the heart of this decision maker, international, those who hold this veto power. Why have not until now they have not accepted the ceasefire which Algeria has been claiming since the very first of January last year.
Anyway, ceasefires are being violated.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr.
My
Zaghlami.
pleasure.
I have a question for you, Mr. Swiyad. Algeria is intending to call for a meeting later this month to discuss the situation of UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories. What are the possible scenarios that would likely to happen?
The UNRWA agency have been vilified and slanders by Israel and the Israeli force and the Israeli media, given the fact that a large number of the Palestinian refugees and Palestinians in general relies on the basic services and the basic support this agency provides for the Palestinians. So Israel is working to undermine, or has been working to undermine, the role of this agency, and it disseminated like fake information and ideas about the agency, about the involvement of members of the staff of this agency in the 7th October attack. However, like the
Palestinian cause goes back from that date. The Palestinian cause is a cause of decades, not just a date.
Okay, like as I said, like there was like the role of this agency have been scrutinized by a neutral working group that was created by the UN Secretary General, and it issued like a report that was called the Colina report, which stated that the agency has issued procedures and measures that measures that the staff and the members of this agency abide by in or while doing their work and their job. Now, Algeria, what is going to do is going to convene, as you said, like a meeting at the United Nations Security Council to discuss the role and the importance of this agency for the Palestinians. Especially, they are going through a very sad humanitarian crisis, and the Palestinians still need the support and the supplies provided by this agency.
Yes, they're dying from famine, they're dying from hunger, they're dying from cold. Yeah, so this very vital UN body is essential for them. How can Algeria gain international support and stop this plan?
Algeria is going to coordinate, like with its with other non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, to mobilize the support for this agency and to maintain or to ensure the survival and the continuation of this agency to do its work in supporting and helping the Palestinians. Given the fact that some Western countries, European countries, have cut their support for this agency before and their funding for this agency before. Now they are going to try to convince those countries to keep supporting, to helping them do their job and their tasks assigned.
Thank you, Mr. Swiad. Let's stay in the Middle East and talk about a country that have seen major changes, major developments, but at the very first occasion, the Zionist entity exploited instability in Syria to execute a land grab and expand its settlement there. But the United Nations recognizes the region as a part of Syria. The occupation is illegal under international law. My question for you, sir, is beyond, in your opinion, how can the UNSC protect Syria's integrity and sovereignty now?
Well, frankly speaking, I am quite doubtful about what is going on in Syria. From my own humble view, the political situation is still ambiguous. It's not clear for me. That's exactly how I think. And therefore, in other words, Algeria is praising a solution for the all Syrian without any exclusion.
And political-led solution without any foreign interference.
And I think the right partner, it should be the body, it should be the United Nations.
That's exactly, under the umbrella of the United Nations.
Absolutely, under the umbrella of the United Nations Security Council. And I have to admit, right now, United Nations as a whole and the Security Council in particular have done nothing to solve problems in many countries, though we have to keep finger crossed that there will be a solution, because I heard yesterday the special envoy of Guterres to Syria has been presenting their report about possible solution. But the solution is not anymore in the hands of the Syrians themselves, because if you look at the map of Syria right now, we have a lot of interference, foreign interference. I don't have to name these countries, but so many are involved one way or the other. And once more, Syria is now at the mercy of the neighboring countries. Though I have seen so many, especially Western countries, like we are hurrying up to join and to come up and to get in touch with the new leader of Syria. But I am sure this is not for the eyes of the Syrians themselves, neither for the leader, but for their own interests. And therefore, I am still skeptical about solution run or adopted by United Nations Security Council. But from the Algerian point of view, we are asking for the respect of the integrity of Syria, the whole Syria, for the whole community of Syria, whether they are from different religions, different perspectives, and so forth.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Let's remind our viewers that end of mandate was renewed unanimously at the UNSC recently. Amar bin Jama used a very strong message, and I quote, "To those who still doubt that we are witnessing the occupation of new territories in Syria, I would ask, what is your stance on this?" Let's have a listen.
There should be no military forces, military equipment, or personnel in the area of separation other than those of end of quote. Therefore, the presence, The actual presence of Israeli forces in the area is illegal and constitutes a flagrant violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement. Because that we are witnessing the occupation of new territories in Syria, I would ask, what is your stance on this? These acts are neither defensive nor justified.
Mr. Spiad, we've seen ceasefire resolutions being adopted by violated by the Zionist occupier in Palestine, in Lebanon. That ceasefire agreement have seen many violations. Yemen is also attacked by the Zionist entity now. Applying pressure at the UNSC and exposing these practices would finally make the Council reconsider its responsibility in establishing peace and security, in your opinion?
The United Nations in general and the United Nations Security Council in particular as responsible for maintaining peace and international security, like its legitimacy, its credibility, its raison d'etre are at stake, given its inability to address the crises and wars that have been taking place in the world. Particularly, since the very existence of these organizations. Now, Israel, or this Zionist occupation, has never respected the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council or the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly. Now, the United Nations Security Council, as I said, as its credibility is at stake, it needs like some reforms in order to be able to address the topics that are exposed before it, especially like in the Middle East. And the Middle East, it's a precarious, it's a volatile region. Israel, as I said, it is expanding geographically, it's interfering in multiple countries in the region, as you just mentioned, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon. And the United Nations, because or due to the veto of the permanent members, is, it's working, it's furthering, it's achieving its goals, it's working with immunity that is given to it by the United Nations, by the United States and the permanent members' veto.
Yes, of course. Let's move on now to Africa. Algeria is part of the A3+ group advocating for African voices in coordination and consultation with the continent's countries. Africa is recently witnessing many conflict zones. Clashes in Sudan intensified in 2024. Libya held municipal elections, but the political process and solution is not finalized yet. My question for you, Mr. Zaghlami, is how is Algeria, through this group, reinforcing its long-standing advocacy for non-interference and inclusive political dialogue as essential principles in solving African crises?
Let's first of all point it out, Algeria is among the rare countries in Africa that have been, or has been advocating a regular, constant and balanced foreign policy towards the continent, based on non-interference, based on supporting the right of the African countries to have their independence, based on the principle of African problems should be solved by the African themselves. And therefore we are supporting all movement for self-independence, as it is now the case in Western Sahara and so forth. So Algeria has been advocating full support, has been asking for full support African, and of course right now Algeria is speaking in United Nations as for the African, as one single voice of the African. And for the last couple of years, months and so forth, they have been Algeria has been coordinating with different groups of, I think, what we call C10.
Yes. Algeria is part of the A3+ group.
Absolutely.
And the C10 group.
So I think right now Algeria is seen as as the leading group, the leading country which is trying to gather all African towards more independence, more dignity, recovering their dignity, their independence, and more than that, their stability. And I think to move a little bit outside this, our Minister of Foreign Affairs for the last couple of days have been running, visiting so many countries. He has visited already Rwanda, Burundi, and Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, and right now Central African Republic. Then we have Cameroon. Then we have Congo Brazzaville. So the Secretary of State in charge of Africa, Mrs. Mansouri, she's in Gambia. So we have recovering, we have catching up with our image of of Algerians supporting African cause. So there is no doubt Algeria has not changed in its commitment to supporting the African case.
All right, thank you. Let's have a listen to Algeria's representative speaking on behalf of the 8-3+ group.
We reiterate our calls for the Sudanese parties to implement an immediate ceasefire without precondition. Without precondition. We cannot afford to lose more innocent civilians. We cannot afford more displacement, more sexual violence, more food insecurity, destruction, and instability in the region. It is past time that all conflict parties engage in a meaningful, transparent, and Sudanese political process under the umbrella of the UN,
of course. On January 21, Algeria plans to convene a high-level meeting on counter-terrorism in Africa, which will be chaired by Ahmed Attaf, Minister of State, Foreign Affairs, National Committee of Bad and African Affairs. Algeria, and with its history in fighting terrorism, can share its experience to the world. But, Mr. Swad, besides sharing experience, what are the perspectives of this meeting?
Okay, this meeting that is going to be convened is going to address and to tackle and to reaffirm the importance of addressing the topic or the issue of terrorism in Africa. Mm-hmm. As Africa, I mean, different members or different countries in Africa are still struggling with this phenomenon, this disastrous phenomenon. Yes. Like the power vacuum, the security vacuum in different parts of Africa, mainly in the Sahel region, constituted a fertile ground for terrorist organizations and criminal organizations to operate and to affect negatively and disastrously the constituent or the countries in Africa. Now, this security vacuum or power vacuum is attributed to the frequent external interventions, whether the direct military interventions or the political interference in the affairs of the African nations. Now, Algeria, what is going to do in this meeting is going to mobilize the support and to mobilize the members of the United Nations Security Council to support and to heed the topic of terrorism, countering terrorism. And as you just said, Algeria has struggled with terrorism for over a decade, and it garnered like an experience that would help and provide it for Africans to help them fight and deal with this phenomenon.
Yes. Allow me to move on, gentlemen, to another just cause that Algeria advocates for in every occasion. We're talking about the last colony in Africa, Western Sahara, is a question of decolonization, as Sahrawi people have the right to self-determination. Algerian delegation to the UN used the right to reply to the Moroccan allegations on Western Sahara many times. Let's have a listen.
Western Sahara is a question of decolonization. It is recognized as such internationally and documented in all relevant UN reports and resolutions. Madam Chair, the conflict in Western Sahara is a question of decolonization to which the realization of the right to self-determination is interlinked. This very question is on the agenda of the 4th Committee of the General Assembly and the Special Committee on Decolonization. Morocco and the Frente Polisario, which the United Nations recognizes as the only legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people, are the two parties to the conflict in Western Sahara. They have accepted the settlement plan negotiated under the auspices of the OAU and the UN regarding the ceasefire agreement and the referendum for self-determination, as endorsed by the Resolution 690 of the Security Council in 1991. It is appalling that the Moroccan delegation continues to reiterate the same allegations and to hold this committee hostage to subvert reality, bend the facts, and deflect the attention on real issues by attacking my country. So here we are, once again, forced to listen to the Morocco's baseless accusations. We will not follow the path of the Moroccan delegation, who showed to everyone in this room the real narrative of an occupier that imposes the worst atrocities on the Sahrawi people, illegally plunders their resources and violates their fundamental rights and freedom on a daily basis. The agenda item 70 of the third committee is on the right to self-determination, so let's talk about the violations committed by Morocco, which denies the Sahrawi people exercising their inalienable right. The latest SG reports on the situation in Western Sahara to the General Assembly and the Security Council respectively indicate the following. OHCHR continued to receive reports of hindrance, intimidation and harassment against Sahrawi activists advocating for the right to self-determination, pointing to an increasingly shrinking civic space. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention observed the violation of a Sahrawi journalist's right to a fair trial. A Moroccan court upheld the decision that had denied a Sahrawi human rights defender a license to practice law due to his political opinions and affiliation with civil society organizations supporting the right to self-determination. The OHCHR was not able to visit Western Sahara for the 9th consecutive year despite multiple official requests. Madam Chair, the 9th consecutive year, that's almost a decade, in addition to nearly 5 decades of colonization and gross human rights violations. This development leaves no room for doubt that the blackout imposed by Morocco in the occupied territories clearly shows Morocco's fear of the exposure of its multiple abuses against the people of Western Sahara. Algeria will continue to express its unwavering support for the Sahrawi people's inalienable right to self-determination. Algeria will therefore remain faithful to its doctrine and cardinal principles, as well as the principles and objectives of the United Nations Charter. I thank you.
Mr. Zaghlami, we've just heard strong words from the Algerian delegation. Raising awareness about Western Sahara hinders the Moroccan plan to gain time and extend its 5 decades decolonization. Can you talk about the last achievements of Western Sahara on the international stage?
I think, first of all, Western Sahara issue, it's seen as the last colony in Africa to start with. And of course, United Nations has been involved in the process of solution. And the question right now, why United Nations, and through United Nations its mission MINURSO, why did not implement the referendum, which is supposed to be in 1991?
Yes.
This is the big question. So the solution is so easy, because so many Western countries are obstructing this process, whether it's USA, whether it's France, whether it's, of course, some Western countries, I would say Spain, and the question is, of course, is to be solved by United Nations Security Council. And as a matter of fact, the Secretary General Guterres has already nominated his special envoy, Stefani de Mistura, but until now we didn't say anything. So how we are now dealing with, it looks as there is some kind of complicity and the bias of Western countries in the process of implementing obstructing the process of implementing the project of solution through a referendum. And Western Sahrawi people cannot wait longer. They have been resuming fight, and of course it's their duty, and we should support them for this cause against the manipulation and the allegation of the Makhzen, which tried to give a wrong picture of what happened over there. But they should, one way or the other, obey by the rules of determination of the Western Saharan people.
Yes, okay. Always with African Matters, Africa does not have a permanent seat at the UNSC. The reform calls for 2 permanent seats with veto rights. Algeria is a member of the C10 and firmly supports the common African position. Mr. To what extent do you think that these 2 permanent seats would change the dynamism at the Security Council?
As I just said earlier, the United Nations needs to be reformed, and reforms is not an easy task because it requires amending the UN Charter, which is something almost impossible. Since its creation in 1945, the United Nations Charter has been amended only 3 times, and which is partial reforms. However, some proposals is to change the way the United Nations Security Council work, or by the inclusion of new members to the UN Security Council. This has happened before. For example, in the 1965, the United Nations Security Council included only 10 members, but since 1965 they became 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent. Now, the inclusion of new members requires, especially if we give them and grant them the right to veto decisions, it requires the anonymous approval of the 5 permanent members, something that is not likely in the future. I don't think the United States or Great Britain or France will give a new or accept an African country to be a permanent, or Africa to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. So the permanent members, as I said, are not likely to support this proposal. However, as I said, there is an agreement among all the countries of all the members of the United Nations General Assembly agree that reforms is needed and required. Yes, and the outcomes of negotiations between the countries and the member states of the UN is the basis for the reform that is to be applied and to be adopted. So reform, I don't say it is impossible to happen, because there are what we call them there are other options and other mechanisms that would give Africans more influence and more leverage in the working of the United Nations in general, the United Nations Security Council in particular. Given the fact the United Nations Security Council is supposed to be representative of all the regions of the world, and Africa is not represented, and a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that have been taking place in Africa, the solutions and the policies have been imposed on them by the ones who drafted the UN Charter, and the ones who won the Second World War.
Another question that was raised at the UNSC is the access to documents. Only permanent members had the right to access, and some even opposed this revision. Algeria's efforts made it possible for all the 15 members to have that access. Algeria has only been a member for 1 year and is already making these changes. That says a lot, doesn't it, about the UNSC?
Well, I think, frankly speaking, United Nations Security Council is the historical legacy of what has been, what have come out of the Second World War II. In other words, it represents those who have been in power, and particularly Western countries, and therefore they want to keep their privilege and they don't want to change. And frankly, I do agree with our representative, Mr. Benjamin, that the United Nations is outdated, is obsolete one. Does not, it's an old-fashioned. This does not represent anymore, does not reflect anymore the will and the requirement of 193 countries. Yes. And therefore, not only it should be reformed, it should be reformed fully and deeply. And I heard some voices, okay, we will give you 2 permanent, non-permanent
2 permanent seats and 2 non-permanent seats.
But what is behind this tricky thing is, they said, yes, I will give you 2 members, whether permanent, but we don't have the power of the veto. And this is exactly the game the Western countries are playing. I would say, frankly, I don't expect a lot from United Nations Security Council as long as the hostage, that's exactly what, the hostage of those Western power, which are hijacking the future and the wills of all countries. And therefore, what we should ask for multiple bodies, multipolarity. That's we should, because from my own view, United United Nations Security Council with this form, this frame, will not offer any solution. And I'm not being pessimistic, but I would say as long as United States, as not France, as not Great Britain are having power on this, they won't accept any change, anyone challenging their power. And therefore, I think, okay, Algeria is doing its best to claim reform, but we have to have pressure.
Along with other African countries,
yes,
along with Africa,
yes.
A lot of African countries
Absolutely.
have gained independence since, and I think that Africa
Yes.
should have at least one permanent seat with the
Absolutely.
veto power.
You are quite right, because Algeria, Africa has 55 countries. How on earth you accept that African continent with 55 countries will be represented by one eye or two? This is completely wrong. This is not completely unfair. This is not completely biased and partial. And therefore, we should look at deep and I would say full reform of United Nations if they want to, if it want to survive the next century. Otherwise, it will be kept under the privilege of those who have the power.
Okay, thank you so much, our guest. Thank you. With these words, we come to an end of today's special edition. Special thanks to our guest. Thank you for watching and being with us. I'll see you another time.